Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today at your Pushback channel, and thank you for joining this radio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to compare the first 18 months of the Trump presidency versus the first 18 months of the Biden presidency, and compare the two in regard to the amount of court actions, legal actions that were taken against the Trump presidency in the federal court as opposed to the Biden administration. Now, certainly by my count, and I'd like to know if someone can correct me here, that there's about 5-1. So for every one action that was taken to stop something the Biden administration wanted to do, there were five actions taken against the Trump presidency. Now, when Trump came to office, I was amazed at just the total attack from all sides of the legal spectrum, all of it globalist controlled, as they tried to stop everything Trump tried to do, whether it be the border wall, any restriction on immigration, and anything he wanted to do. The list goes on. Now, comparing that to the Biden, the Biden administration has wrecked and torn the United States to pieces. Again, part of the globalist sort of script, but they rather would have done that over a longer period of time. So if Hillary had got into the White House, then they could have organised the destruction of America over an 8-year period rather than having to condense it into 2 or 3 years, which is what they're trying to do now. So it's probably more severe than it would otherwise have been if they'd had the whole 8 years to play with it. But one thing, it did intrigue me, the amount of cases that were brought in the federal courts against the Trump administration. It seemed that everything they want to do is getting blocked. The media, the globalist controlled media, was putting it forward during the Trump years as our court, isn't our legal system wonderful? We can stop this fascist Nazi president. And so the tiniest thing, I mean, Trump wants to reduce the amount of legal aliens coming into the United States, and that's it. It gets stopped in the courts. Now, what sort of intrigued me at the time was how many parties were taking the matter to court, whether it was Democrat state governors, whether it was NGOs, think tanks, front organisations that were being created out of thin air 5 minutes previously, but they were super cashed up and well funded, and they somehow were able to get their cases heard in emergency hearings. They could go to a judge on Sunday morning, and before lunch was even served, they had a stay against the Trump administration. So they're able to go to these activist judges, get an emergency hearing, and get these Trump policies, all of which were quite reasonable, all these policies stopped. I mean, the reason they wanted to stop them because they weren't part of the globalist script, and that's why. It was only that. It was no other reason. They had the propaganda of children ripped from mothers, ripped from crying mothers, little babies, Hitler. And they did all the emotive rhetoric and so on, but the reality was quite different. But comparing the two, now there was an army of NGOs, organisations coming thin air, the ADL, organisations everywhere were super cashed up. They had access to unlimited funds. They could go to activist judges in federal courts and have everything Trump tried to do stopped or stayed or slowed down or otherwise restricted. So now if there was another hearing and the Trump administration won that, then they could go to an appeals court again, always getting emergency hearings, always been able to get activist judges to give them the decision they wanted. I mean, when you look at some of the documents that were being lodged, the legal arguments were completely flimsy. It was totally emotional, completely flimsy. And we shouldn't stop illegal aliens that are coming into the country because it's not who we are. Things like that. And that was enough to get a judge to rule on it. I mean, insane stuff. So there was activists all throughout the legal system, through the appeals courts and so on, and the Supreme Court then was pretty finely balanced. So compare that with the aggressive, the voluminous amount of litigation against the Trump presidency from all sides, and the how much it obstructed and hamstrung that presidency. And equally, I don't think, I think Jeff Sessions was a decent man as the Attorney General, but I don't think he was even remotely prepared for that onslaught. And I think it caught him quite flat-footed, along with other things, the Russia investigation. And I think he went down, like a sack of shit. He just couldn't deal with that sort of, and hadn't expected it. And I think too that the Trump team didn't get in there and make sure Sessions had a backbone and stayed on course and focused on it and fought back just as aggressively as the Trump administration was being attacked. Sessions didn't do that, which gave the globalists a huge advantage over Trump for a couple of years plus. And so really the first 2 years were not wasted, but not even a small proportion of the things that Trump was trying to achieve were getting through. So now compare that, though, to the Biden presidency. Now, if the Republicans are concerned about Biden tearing the country to pieces, geez, you wouldn't know it. The amount of litigation to stop Biden for things like, selling off the strategic oil reserve and or petroleum reserve, the opening the border and having the masses of illegal aliens come in, refusing to enforce the laws, immigration laws, illegally busing and putting these illegal aliens all around the country before they've had their status verified, and so on and so forth. The COVID lockdowns, the amount of illegality, in my view, that the Biden administration is engaged in, including weaponizing the Justice Department to go after political opponents and things like that. Those sorts of things. There should be an avalanche of lawsuits against the Biden administration, but there isn't. For some reason, all that the right wing side of things, the think tanks or the right wing organizations or those things, they're strangely silent on this. Sure, there's a few that are in there, but they're not very well funded. They've got to really go through slow, and they can't somehow seem to find activist judges that'll give them emergency hearings. They've got to join a long queue and wait their turn, which means, Biden's got months to, or the administration, not Biden, he doesn't even know what day it is, that the administration's got plenty of time to get things moving and get them in place. And then it's less likely, if it doesn't happen quickly, it's less likely that a judge will overturn it if it's already been in practice for 6 months. So for some reason, there's just no flurry of litigation, even though there's a vast array of legislation that could be stopped if there was a well-funded. There's no NGOs. There's nothing near the amount of players with the cash that they had that is trying to stop the Biden administration destroy the United States. So why is that? Well, the globalists were fully supporting the anti-Trump campaign. The globalists are providing no support for the anti-Biden legislation. Activist judges, that would be sympathetic to the right are much harder to find. Judges who would be sympathetic to that are probably too frightened or intimidated to make a ruling that if they do rule in against the Biden administration, that magically a bag of white powder will appear in their lounge room, or their son will be found to be a rapist, or whatever. So that they realise that if they decide against the Biden administration, they may have some real career problems ahead. And I think a lot of justices are intimidated by the weaponizing of the so-called, the misnamed Justice Department. But you have a look at that too, and just notice the difference, the huge amount of effort, the colossal amount of effort that went into stopping and slowing down Trump, who was doing only benign things, stopping illegal immigration, stopping migration of people who didn't have skills and couldn't speak English. I mean, nothing untoward there. A very, very sensible policy, but not what the globalists wanted. So they did everything to fuck him up. Biden, by contrast, is getting a dream run There's nowhere near the amount of litigation. Emergency hearings are not being granted, or sometimes, but rarely granted to people trying to stop the Biden administration. The appeals courts are far slower to hear the cases against the Biden administration, and were lightning quick to hear them against the Trump administration. So you have a look at that, but it just, the contrast is stark. It's huge. It just goes to show you the extent of the forces that lined up to stop Trump, the huge amount of money and resources and time and energy and activism was put into stopping Trump is truly awesome. Have a look at it yourself. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.